As we come to Exodus chapter 12 verses 1 to 28, we notice that the story, rather strangely, of the final plague breaks off with a long and detailed description of the instructions for the first celebration of the Passover. Unexpectedly, it introduces us to the Israelites as themselves under the threat of the final plague. It is this which explains why the Passover is included at this point. It was given to the Israelites by God himself as a means for they themselves to escape from his anger. No less than Pharaoh, the Israelites had proved to be rebels against God, as we've seen, for example, in chapter 5:21 and 6 verse 9. They had revealed that God's recognition of the sinfulness of humankind, as stated in Genesis chapter 6 verse 5, was just as appropriate to them as to the Egyptians. They were sinners by nature, and inescapably held in bondage to the gods of Egypt, who were hostile to God. Two things were then required. God must break the power of Egypt and make provision to remove the guilt of the Israelites. Only if he did this could they be his people. All this explains the vital importance of these verses. The Israelites stood under the wrath of the holy God. The judgment for their sin was death. Before God acted against Egypt, God needed to do something to remove that verdict from upon his people. And this was provided by the Passover ritual. Fundamental to the ritual was the blood of the lamb, as we see in verses 21 to 23. In the Old Testament, blood was thought to symbolize life. This means that the blood of a sacrifice symbolized a life brought to an end by death in a violent way. Often, as here, the blood was seen as substitutionary. That is, it pictured a life given up in place of another. The life of the firstborn Israelite was due to God, but the life of the lamb was offered in his place. In this way, the penalty for sin and the wrath of God were averted, as we see especially in verse 23. The ritual made it very clear that the lamb was to be without defect, as we see in verse 5. The Israelites themselves were defective because of their sin. None of them could offer their lives for others because they were under the same judgment. It was necessary that something which symbolized a perfect and sinless life be found. Only such a life, given up in death, could avert the destroyer. Thus the Passover lamb removed the guilty verdict of God against the Israelites. The penalty for their sin was fully paid, and they were free from God's judgment. But that was not all. That same night, the power of Egypt over the people was brought to an end. The Passover was also to be celebrated in preparation for a journey, as we see in verse 11. Together with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is described in verses 14 to 21. This was intended to emphasize that the Passover was to mark a new start. Leaven or dough is often viewed in the Bible as a symbol of evil. This is obviously true in these verses. Thus the putting aside of leaven was intended to symbolize lives given over to God in a new start. A break with the past was to be followed by a life of obedience to the Lord. In the years that followed, these two feasts were to be regularly observed, as we see in verses 24 to 27, and they were to be observed as a permanent reminder of the way in which God had made the Israelites his people. This is emphasized by the fact that the Israelite New Year was to be dated from the original Passover. And yet it was not all Israelites, or even only Israelites, who were to benefit from the Passover. Earlier, some of the Egyptians had shown respect for the Lord, as we read in chapter 8 verse 20. And later a multitude of people not born Israelites would accompany the departing descendants of Abraham, as we see in chapter 12 verse 38. This suggests that many Egyptians must have obeyed God's commands made in this chapter. It was not those who were Israelites by nationality or race who proved to be the Lord's people. It was those who obeyed him. It's easy to read the Old Testament and think that the Lord was the God of a specific people group. Some of the laws which exclude certain groups from joining Israel can be understood in this way. For example, Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 1 to 8. And yet the laws of ancient Israel were not so much nationalistic as religious. When members of other nations or people became followers of the Lord, they were welcomed as full members of his people. And this is made especially clear in the book of Ruth. There, a Moabite woman, by race, becomes a follower of the Lord, and is made a direct descendant not only of David, but of great David's greatest son. The people of God in the Bible are only ever truly his when they obey his word.